Feminists are deeply unpleasant people. This is, of course, one of the main factors why their ideology is shrinking, not growing, even as their voices become louder and shriller. There is one, however, who's learned to escape the Tumblr hug box, who's insidiously inveigling her way into the minds of our youth.
Oh, hi, babes!
So how did this slip of a girl become a threat to Western values? Well, there's two mostly overlapping reasons here. Firstly, her audience is, rather distressingly, incredibly young. They are mostly young enough that they believe professional wrestling is a real sport, and that is the level of intellectual engagement that they bring to the table. She is talking to kids. Kids will believe anything. And she's talking to them with the same sort of smiley, happy children's TV presenter personality that I grew up watching on Blue Peter. The thing is, children really will believe anything. It is for their benefit that we put labels on Superman capes saying, "This will not make you fly." And if you're a kid in a Western country growing up in a safe and happy environment, there's no reason why you wouldn't ever believe the things that grown-ups are telling you. By the time that kids are starting secondary school and moving into Laci's audience, we've taught them that your teachers just wouldn't lie to you. That's just basic. You don't need to ask your math teacher why trigonometry works as long as it does. You've been taught that he knows what he's talking about, and you defer to him. His perception of the real world, even if it doesn't follow your intuition, is the correct one. And that's how things have to be. If we can't trust teachers, then as a society we can never learn anything new. We can't stand on the shoulders of giants, as it were, because we'd spend the whole time in school just proving why 2 + 2 is 4 and not blue. You know, we have to at some point decide this is true, and we have to trust teachers to tell our kids that. Children are trusting, but sadly children are stupid, which is not necessarily a bad thing. You know, when we say something's childlike, we normally mean there's a sort of naivety and innocence, a willingness to uncynically enjoy themselves, to believe that the box fort really is a castle that they can defend. And it's not a bad thing to be a bit naive sometimes, but children are naive, and sometimes that means that we just cannot treat them the same way that we would treat adults. It's why there's very strict regulations on advertising and targeting children in TV, because children will slurp up almost any message that you throw at them and it'll stick with them for years and years afterwards. This is how we still have some genuinely racist people in our society. It's how the vast majority of domestic violence happens too, because kids are taught by grown-ups that say black people aren't really people, or that hitting your wife is okay. And once that's taught, once that's sitting in the back of your brain, it's almost impossible to get rid of. It doesn't matter how rationally you explain to them. Once it's there, that's how they perceive reality. This is genuinely what older people tell us, people who came from less politically correct times, who grew up, you know, calling people ethnic slurs. They tell us that they still have racist thoughts. It doesn't matter that they know it's wrong, they still have them because they learned young. In the past, religions tried to conquer education. They said that out of the goodness of their hearts, they would run education for children where no one else would. Why? Why go to that expense? Seriously, it's expensive to run schools. It takes time, it takes resources, so why do that? Well, because when you're allowed to preach your dogma to children, you vastly tighten your grip on wider society. Kids trust the people who teach them, even if they shouldn't, even if that person hits them, even if that person is sexually abusing their altar boy, they will trust a teacher. If they don't, they couldn't learn anything at all. A teacher is someone you have to implicitly believe. And when that teacher is telling you about a world that you can't see, that you can't intuitively understand, a world like heaven and hell, perhaps, like original sin, like patriarchy, you defer to them. It's natural to do that because they've been right about so much else. And that is why churches wanted access to young people, to put ideas in their heads young, to say, we know this and you don't, and ensure that throughout their whole lives they were dependent on the clerical class. Children are clearly very vulnerable to picking up whatever insane messages exist around them, and in the modern world that's kind of a problem, especially when so much of our online culture is so fragmented into the political extremes of one form or another. But why is Laci actually dangerous? After all, it's not her fault that a bunch of 12 and 13-year-olds watch her. And that's true, actually. She's gone on record as being quite surprised about her demographics. But kids can watch whatever they want, right? I mean, they have that opportunity. They have YouTube. They can search for whatever they're looking for. So why is Laci the dangerous one? Why isn't someone preaching Marxism or Wahhabism or any other crackpot ideology dangerous in the same way that Laci is? It's because she's not simply spouting doctrine. You know, if you go and watch a video made by a Wahhabist preacher who is going to tell you that the whole of the West is the great Satan that must be destroyed at all costs, and variations on a theme. He's going to tell you things that are pretty hardcore, frankly, if you're 12 or 13 years old. And he's going to tell you that and nothing else, because that's his whole message. But for Laci, a lot of what she's saying is actually genuinely quite helpful for kids, especially over in the US, where sex education is just dreadful, you know, where it's abstinence only, with no condoms, where no one wants to even talk to kids in class. But Laci really is mostly teaching good things, you know, especially through Sex Plus. Less so through Braless, but through Sex Plus, where she just is doing essentially the modern birds and the bees for kids who've never had an adult who would talk to them frankly about that. You know, and that's the thing. That's what makes her genuinely dangerous here, because at the same time as she's saying, maybe get some consent, that would be a good thing. Hey, lubricant, that's a thing that perhaps you might be interested in. You know, while she's saying things that on the surface are actually quite helpful, she's slipping into it, this pernicious doctrine underneath it. She earns the trust of young people by being this nice, happy, honest-sounding person who talks very frankly about quite taboo things in the way that most adults wouldn't to a younger kid. She's this cool aunt, you know, one that they would never think of questioning. She must be right. She's been right about everything else. And now she's going to tell you about the patriarchy. And you would never think that she could be wrong, you know? And the worst thing about this is that anyone who'd tell you are wrong, if your parents say, no, don't be silly, of course there's no organised patriarchy trying to rape and beat women into submission. Of course not. They are the same ones who told you, no, we do not talk about masturbation. These are the same ones who you did not trust to teach you properly about sex. This is Laci's danger. She is not a teacher that's standing up in front of the class like the Wahhabist, telling them that the great Satan must be destroyed. She is not the Stormfront guy saying that the international Jewish conspiracy is leading to a genocide of white people. She is not telling blatant untruths. She is, in fact, telling many actual truths, things that you wouldn't think to question, and she's slipping into that, something faintly monstrous. And this is Laci, this is my cool aunt, of course you believe her. If you aren't into feminist crap at that age, and God knows who would be, it'll just sit in your head forever, because you would never think to question it. By the time that these kids get to 18, 19, 20 years old, and they've believed this message for 5, 6 years, never questioned it. Anyone who told them to question it was exactly the same person who they couldn't trust about anything else. And by the time that they are adults, it is far too late. It's close to impossible for them to just reject that message. Just like the Jesuits who said, if you can give me the boy until he's 7, I can give you the man. Laci is giving feminism all of these young people that she is speaking to, and she is doing so in such a way that they don't even realise that they have been given to an ideology. And that is her danger. Lies dressed up as truth, lies hidden beside truth. She is getting to our children and giving them a distorted view of the world, and doing so perniciously, so venomously, that they will never question that the sky is not green. This is wrong. It is fundamentally wrong. You cannot call yourself a teacher, especially a teacher of teenagers, of adolescents, of children, of those who do not know better and who trust you. You cannot call yourself a teacher if you deliberately mislead their view of the world simply because of your own ideology. You are not letting them decide, and that is brainwashing. The sign of a strong intellectual position is one that does not require these kind of tactics to succeed. A strong intellectual position is one that stands up even to the most cynical of attacks. If the only way to convince people of your position is to do so when they are too young to question it, then that is a huge failing of your ideology. Just like racism and anti-Semitism, patriarchy is something that an adult would reject out of hand, but that lingers in public consciousness because children are past these beliefs before they have the tools to resist them. This is how irrational beliefs become accepted, and this is how reason is removed from the debate, by debating with those under the age of reason. Thanks for listening. I am the political animal, pouncing on bad ideas and eating their babies.